There's a story people tell to prove the Unsullied are the greatest soldiers in the world. 3,000 of them, slave soldiers from a slaver city, stood in front of the gates of Qohor against a horde of 20,000 Dothraki. 18 times the horsemen charged. 18 times the spears came down, and the line held. By the end, 12,000 Dothraki were dead, and the survivors rode up to the eunuchs and threw their own braids on the ground in tribute. It's one of the great last stands in the world, and it is absolutely used as proof that these are the finest infantry ever trained. So let me give you the number that never makes it onto the poster. Of those 3,000 Unsullied, 600 walked away. They won, and they lost 80% of their force doing it. And the men they lost were not the kind of men you can go and find more of. That's the thing about the Unsullied, that the legend is very carefully built to make you forget. Not that they're bad, they're extraordinary. The problem is that being an extraordinary soldier and being a complete army are two totally different things. And the gap between them is exactly where the Unsullied fall apart. So here's the thesis, and I want you to hold it the whole way through. The Unsullied are almost perfect soldiers. And that is precisely the trap. Because a perfect soldier is not a perfect army. They can only win the battle somebody hands them. They cannot replace what winning it costs. And their whole genius is answering a question they never get to ask, which is whether this is a fight they should be having at all. Let's start with what's actually standing in that field at Qohor. The Unsullied are infantry. Specifically, they're a phalanx, a block of men with spears and shields and short swords, trained to lock together and hold a line modeled on the old lockstep legions of a fallen empire. And within that block, they are the best in the world. Nobody stands more firmly, nobody panics less, nobody holds when holding seems insane. But look at what they are not. They have no cavalry. They don't ride. There are no horsemen to go with them. No mounted scouts riding ahead to find the enemy, no riders to run down a beaten foe, and no bowmen of their own to soften a charge before it lands. They are one arm of an army, and they are only that one arm. And here's why that matters more than it sounds. In a real war, the side with cavalry decides where the battle happens and when. Horsemen scout, they screen, they raid your supply lines, they force you to fight on ground you didn't choose, or starve on ground you did. Infantry, no matter how good, mostly has to stand where it's put and wait for the war to come to it. So the Unsullied have this strange ceiling built into them. They can win almost any battle you place in front of, and they have almost no say in which battles those are. They can win the fight. They cannot choose the fight. There's a simple test for whether something is an army or just a piece of one. Ask what it can do the day after a battle. A real army with cavalry can pursue a broken enemy and turn a win into a rout, or cover a retreat and turn a loss into a survivable setback. It can send riders out to learn where the enemy is before blundering into him. It can protect its own baggage and threaten his. The Unsullied can do none of that. Win or lose when the fighting stops. They are a block of men on foot in the middle of a very large continent, and everything beyond the reach of a thrown spear belongs to whoever brought horses. A phalanx is a wall. A wall is a wonderful thing to have in a battle and a useless thing to have in a war, because walls don't move, don't chase, don't scout, and don't decide anything. They just hold and wait to be used well by someone who brought the rest of the toolkit. And Qohor, the great legend itself, tells you this if you actually read it. The Unsullied weren't the plan at Qohor. They were the emergency. The city's own heavy cavalry had already been smashed, and the 2 companies of sellswords the city hired had already broken their contracts and run. The eunuchs were the last thing standing after the rest of the army fell apart. That's not the story of an unstoppable force. That's the story of the piece you throw in front of the gate when everything with a horse has already died or fled. Which brings us to the number that actually matters. The 600. Think about where the Unsullied come from. They're not recruited. They're not levied. They are manufactured. And the factory is a slaver city. And the process takes about 10 years. It starts when the boys are 5. The training is designed to be survived by roughly 1 in 3, and the ones who fail don't wash out. They die. Every finished Unsullied standing in that plaza represents a decade of and a pile of boys who didn't make it. That is the most expensive infantry in the world. And the cost isn't gold. The cost is time you can't compress and lives you can't get back. Now hold that next to Qohor, a victory that turned 3,000 into 600. In a conventional army, catastrophe still has a recovery path because more men can eventually be recruited or levied. The replacements may be worse. They may take time. But there is still a pool to draw from. Not here. You cannot refill the Unsullied by next spring. You cannot refill them by next year. Every single one you lose is gone. And the only way to make another is to send a 5-year-old back into that same machine and wait a decade. So even their greatest triumphs quietly bleed them towards zero, because there is no bottom of the barrel to scrape. There's just the barrel getting emptier. And this is where the story turns genuinely tragic, and it's about the one person the whole tale wants you to root for. Daenerys buys the Unsullied from the slave city that makes them, then turns those soldiers against their masters, and destroys the system that produced them, which is the right thing to do. It's the heroic thing to do. It also means the system she is willing to use can never replace them. Astapor can try to recreate Unsullied later, but Daenerys cannot rebuild that pipeline without rebuilding the slavery and child abuse she rejected. Her single most valuable military asset is something her own values will never let her manufacture again. Every Unsullied who dies is a loss she cannot ethically replace. So that's the body count problem. Now let's talk about the part people get wrong in the other direction. There's a lazy version of this argument that says the Unsullied are mindless, that they can't think, that they just stand there and follow orders because there's nobody among them who can lead. And that's simply false, and if I said it, you'd be right. To stop the video, the Unsullied have officers. Rank is marked right on the helmet. 1 spike for the ranks, 3 spikes for an officer. They have a commander, a second-in-command, named captains. There is a real chain of command in there. So the problem was never that they can't be led. The problem is deeper and more interesting than that. The entire instrument, top to bottom, officers included, is optimized to execute one script perfectly. Form the wall, hold the wall, do not break, advance in lockstep. That script is a masterpiece. And inside the situations it was written for, nothing on the field does it better. But an army doesn't get to pick its situations, and discipline is only an advantage when it's pointed at the right problem. Perfect obedience running the wrong plan doesn't save you. It just executes the wrong plan flawlessly and on time. The most disciplined way to march into the wrong fight is still marching into the wrong fight. The books show the danger of treating Unsullied as magic. After Daenerys leaves, a new ruler in Astapor tries to raise fresh Unsullied and marches them into open battle. They lose. Later, those newly made troops are cut apart by sellswords and a disciplined legion. But here's the important caveat. These are not clean evidence against Daenerys' veterans. The books treat them as green and inferior imitators, so they do not prove that real Unsullied fail outside Qohor. What they show is how much the reputation depends on the full training, formation, and conditions. For the real veterans, we need stronger evidence. So take it from the experts on the real thing. One of the finest knights in Westeros, a man who has fought beside and against the best, sums the Unsullied up as brave soldiers, but not warriors, and not knights. And the sharpest military mind in the whole story lands in the same place, man to man. He says the Unsullied are no better than any other spearmen. It's their discipline that makes them dangerous. And then the crucial clause, but if they cannot form up into their spear wall, that edge is gone. Their strength has a precondition. Take away the wall, and you've taken away the Unsullied, which is really the fourth and last piece of this. They are tuned to one set of inputs. Go back to Qohor one more time, because the legend and the trap are the same event. What actually happened there was one very specific problem. Like cavalry, no armor to speak of, charging head-on, again and again, into a braced line of spears at a fixed point in front of a city. If you were going to design the single perfect scenario for the Unsullied to win, you would design that one. And the Dothraki handed it to them, because the Dothraki despise infantry and refuse to do anything as beneath them as flanking. They could have ridden around. They didn't. They ran at the spears 18 times, because their pride wouldn't let them do anything else. Change any one input, and the whole picture wobbles. A patient enemy who won't charge. Broken ground where the line can't stay solid. An opponent who gets to choose the time and place because he has the horse and you don't. The Unsullied's excellence isn't a flat, general fact. It's conditional. It depends on getting to stand in formation, on flat enough ground, in a fight that comes to them. Take away the conditions and you haven't beaten them. Exactly. You've just stopped handing them the one battle they're built to win. So let me give the other side its best shot, because there is a real one. You could say I'm blaming a screwdriver for not being a hammer. The Unsullied were never supposed to be a whole army by themselves. They're the anvil, not the hammer. You bring the cavalry, you bring the archers, you bring the ships and the dragons, and the Unsullied are the unbreakable center you build all of that around. And discipline, real discipline, is the rarest thing on any battlefield. Most armies in history didn't lose because they were outfought. They lost because men got scared and ran. The Unsullied never run. Never. That alone can be worth more than any other single thing you bring. That's a strong argument. Here's why it doesn't save them. Calling them the anvil doesn't refute the thesis. It is the thesis. An anvil is only as useful as the hammer swinging beside it, which is another way of saying the Unsullied are only as good as the army around them. And look at what that army is made of in this story. The cavalry are Dothraki, who follow strength and fracture the moment they doubt you. The other infantry are sellswords, who are famous, canonically, for switching sides for money. At Qohor, the hired companies fled before the battle even started. Outside Yunkai, one sellsword company flipped to Daenerys, and the other was too drunk to fight. The dragons can't be aimed, so the most disciplined soldiers in the world are permanently chained to the least disciplined pieces on the board. The anvil is flawless. It's everything holding the anvil that keeps giving way. And the never-run point, which really is their best quality, cuts both ways. Not breaking is a miracle when you're in the right position. But discipline does not mean they are physically incapable of an ordered retreat. The real danger is that commanders can spend them in positions where ordinary troops might already have collapsed. If the order is to hold, they can keep holding after the decision itself has become bad. That makes a bad command more expensive. Not because the Unsullied cannot retreat, but because discipline keeps the order functioning. And every one of those losses is difficult to replace. So would the Unsullied fail in a real war? Not the way people expect. They wouldn't fail because they're weak or cowardly or badly trained. They'd fail because they are a perfect answer to a single question in a war that keeps asking different ones. They can win any battle you give them and can't make you give them the right one. They can hold any line and can't replace the men that holding it costs. They will follow the plan into the ground, whether or not it was ever a good plan. The Unsullied are the finest soldiers money can buy. And that's the whole problem, right there in the sentence. You can buy soldiers. You can't buy an army. An army is cavalry, and infantry, and archers, and scouts. It's the men to replace your losses, and the judgment to know which fights are worth having in the first place. The Unsullied are the one piece of that you can purchase fully formed, and it turns out the purchasable piece was never the piece that wins wars. They mastered the battle so completely that everyone forgot to ask them about the war. And the war was always the part that mattered.